2 more on the way now. That's the best we can do at this stage.
No nation is as ravaged by fires as Australia. It is the ever-present force that shapes our land and its people.
Still burning in South Australia and Victoria.
Been engulfed in flames.
Every summer threatens to explode into an inferno. Yet despite repeated disasters, this enemy remains largely unknown to us.
Time to go. Forget it, bro.
Why is it so deadly? And how can we fight it? In this series, we'll meet the scientists trying to crack the mystery of Australian fires.
A lot of people say fire's unpredictable. Because they don't understand it, it takes on a mystical power.
We'll join the frontline forces using an astounding array of technology to fight back. The battle rages as we go inside the Inferno. We are a nation that has grown up with fire. We've learnt something about preventing and fighting them. And yet clearly not enough. The last 5 years have broken all the records. The number of lives lost, the amount of property destroyed, forests burnt, livestock killed. The frequency and severity is unprecedented. 2013 was the hottest ever recorded. The fires started earlier and burnt more intensely than ever before. Flames tore through every state, east to west, north to south. The country was ablaze. And according to experts, these grim records could be a warning for the future.
2013, the summer that we've just experienced, is somewhat like a window into the future. But this isn't the finite end result. This isn't the sort of, I guess, typical summer we're going to see in 20 or 30 years. It's going to get worse.
More than 1 million Australians live in harm's way on the edge of the fire zone, and the numbers are growing. Defending these homes and lives requires massive resources.
You're talking about a veritable army of people and equipment that can be brought to bear when this state, or indeed another state, faces a significant challenge.
Australia already has the largest firefighting force in the world.
You've got probably close to 200,000 volunteers across the country. You could simply not do away with them and still provide the protection that we managed to do.
We have double the number of firefighters than we have in the military. We have more planes in the sky each fire season than we do in our Air Force. But we've reached the limit of how many troops we can throw into this battle. The hope now is that science can help us fight smarter, and that begins by understanding our enemy.
When you look at a flame, what your eye picks up is a fairly solid structure. But in fact, that is made up of a whole lot of interacting surfaces between the volatile gas on the inside and oxygen on the outside, and where they react in the reaction zone, that's what you see glowing.
In suburban Canberra is the world's only laboratory that can replicate the conditions that create a bushfire. Dr. Andrew Sullivan is head of the CSIRO's Pyrotron facility.
Well, the CSIRO Pyrotron's a 25-metre long combustion wind tunnel that we use to study the behaviour of fire burning through bushfire fuels. Okay, fan on, Richard. At one end, we've got a 2-tonne fan that's capable of shifting about 22,000 litres of air a second. So that's the equivalent of a small swimming pool of air every second. We then have the working section, which is where we actually do our experiments. We place the fuel that we're interested in studying.
It takes a combination of factors to start a bushfire. Inside the Pyrotron, they can create different scenarios to see how fires ignite and spread.
Fire is a very complex phenomenon. It's a combination of chemistry, physics involved in the transfer of the heat generated out of the combustion process, and the interaction of those processes with the weather. So it's a very, very complex phenomenon that's very difficult to study in the field.
The Pyrotron is revealing new insights into the interplay of fuel, wind and temperature that combine to disperse flames. And they've discovered that our old models have greatly underestimated the speed at which fires spread through the Australian bush.
The existing models for predicting fire behaviour in dry eucalypt forest underpredict by 3 to 5 times. So we've developed new models for dry eucalypt forest that help bridge that gap of fire behaviour up to wildfires. But that being said, we haven't been able to actually study the behaviour of wildfires in that detail that enables us to be highly certain about predictions at that upper end.
It's new research that's fundamentally changing our understanding of how fires behave. But just how do fires start in the first place? There's never a moment that somewhere in Australia is not burning. And the major culprit is lightning. More than 10 million bolts strike our continent every year. Yet we know surprisingly little about just how they set the landscape ablaze. There are just 2 laboratories in the world that can replicate the high energy of lightning. And one of them is here at Cardiff University in Wales.
To our knowledge, this has not been done before.
Usually this lab is testing the impact of lightning on aircraft. But today, Professor Manu Haddad is trying something different. He's attempting to replicate a lightning strike in the Australian bush.
I'm so excited now whether it's going to do what we want it to do. That's the first thing. And if it's going to do it, how it's going to ignite this tree. Is it at the top? Is it at the bottom? Where? I think this is all unknown for us at the moment. First, whether it will work, and then if it works, where.
A lightning strike is a high-energy discharge of up to 200,000 amps, producing temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. To understand what ignites trees, they'll need to recreate that immense energy inside the laboratory.
It's extremely difficult, or if impossible, to actually get this in the real life. This is the privilege you have in a laboratory. You can control the environment and you can study everything you do in very small detail. And you can also do the measurements that you wouldn't be able to do in the field.
We charge at 54 kV. 3, 2, 1.
And the little Australian import doesn't fail to surprise.
No fire, there's no fire.
Did the camera capture anything?
Yeah, it did.
It did, okay.
Despite a hit of 100,000 amps, the eucalypt remains intact, refusing to ignite.
See the arc? Yeah, the leader moving across.
It turns out it's missing an essential element that's common in the Australian bush. It's in the blue that makes up the Blue Mountains. Fine drops of oil on eucalypt leaves disperse into the air, scattering blue light rays with great effect.
We are trying to mimic what is happening in real life with eucalyptus trees, in particular in the Blue Mountains region, where you have a lot of vapor, oil vapor from eucalyptus trees.
When a small amount of the volatile eucalypt oil is added to the tree, the result is radically different.
3, 2, 1.
It's travelled all the way through.
Yeah.
The tree explodes, then starts burning at its base. A mystery solved.
This is good.
This lightning experiment helps explain one of the real threats of the Australian bush, the sleeper tree. Big trees don't always ignite immediately, and after a lightning strike, they can smoulder away undetected for days or even weeks.
13.231.
Just about all of our fires, they're almost all ignitions from dry lightning storms. We had a storm come through. The storm ignited 5 separate fires.
David Crust is head ranger for a huge national park on the edge of Sydney. For much of the year, a major part of his focus is gazing skywards.
We've got really good lightning detection systems, so we know where the lightning occurs, and we look for ignitions and fires.
Radio detectors pinpoint the position of most of the lightning strikes that hit the park. And after each storm passes, these locations need to be checked to see if a tree may be smouldering.
The crews are going to commence flare operations now.
We use a thing called FLIR, which is a forward-looking infrared camera, which helps us to identify and pinpoint hotspots on the fire that we need to put crews on to deal with.
You can see the log. It's a large tree that's burnt out and fallen down, and the end of the tree is burning. We've got unburnt country out here and burnt country here, so the potential is for that fire to run through the log and into the unburnt country over here.
Just hours after any lightning strike, David can have 4 choppers in the air hunting down potential fires.
I'm a ranger with the Blue Mountains region of national parks. Fire is a massive part of the job, and especially in an area like this where we've got over 500,000 hectares of forested land, which is particularly fire prone. Fire is a big part of our job, whether we want it to be or not. If we're deployed to a remote fire, there's always a risk that, we won't be able to get extracted at the end of the day. We basically go into a fire with the preparation that we may be there for 24 hours. Food, shelter, equipment, all come down on the winch with us.
Infrared cameras can help locate the strike sites. But it's still boots on the ground that are needed to put them out. This tree has been hit by a bolt and is burning slowly upwards from its base.
We need to cut that off, flip it over and get some water into it.
But sleeper trees can smoulder from the inside, undetected, just waiting for the right conditions to ignite into a roaring blaze.
Oh, there's a lot of heat coming off this. We're ready for a bucket now.
The ground team calls in the water bombers to extinguish the smoking remains. It takes 10 on the ground, 4 choppers in the air, a support team back at base. Vast resources to deal with just a single tree. It's an expensive business dealing with these smoking time bombs. But with a national park and the nearby community at risk, it would be more expensive to let them burn. But these remote fires are not the greatest threat. There is a lethal feature unique to the Australian bush that makes it the most dangerous fire zone on Earth. There are dozens, sometimes hundreds of fires burning across Australia every day, lit by lightning, accident, or arson. Most simply burn out. It needs a special combination of weather conditions to turn a small flame into the wall of fire that makes up the Australian nightmare. And that combination occurs with deadly regularity in the most populated corner of the country, the southeast. The danger begins not on land, but at sea. Blown across the vast Southern Ocean, Antarctic winds deliver the temperate weather to Australia's southeastern corner. But paradoxically, they're also a key ingredient in the creation of the annual bushfire season. Magdalena Rose is a meteorologist who studies these unique conditions.
Australia's weather and climate is pretty much perfect for bushfires, which is why such a large part of the country is affected by them. But it's the southeast that's one of the most bushfire-prone areas in the world. What happens is you get a lot of hot air building across central Australia. It effectively becomes like a heat engine or a hot oven, and you're waiting for that door to open and that gush of hot air to start pushing through into the southeast.
The hot winds and superheated air of central Australia are sucked southeast by the low-pressure systems off the coast. A few weeks of that desert heat dries all moisture from the air and soil, with a carpet of winter growth ready to feed the beast. The southern states are set to burn. All that's missing is the final essential ingredient that makes southern Australia so dangerous: us. And the evidence is in our national archives.
What's uniquely captured in this volume is glimpses of colonial landscape before it became unmanaged.
It took just a few decades for European settlers to completely transform the ancient Australian landscape. These paintings by convict artist Joseph Lycett are a snapshot of the country that Europeans found on arrival.
The thing that struck me when I first looked at this album many years ago is the fact that it's a very manicured landscape. You can see the understory of trees is very clear. There's something very purposeful about the rendering of that. And here you have a ordinary enough hunting scene, except that it looks like it's set in this park-like setting, which is what early colonial visitors from Captain Cook onwards often remarked on the quality of the landscape, that it was park-like. Here they are doing two things at once. They're managing the land asset by burning it strategically and making sure that it's going to burn in a way that doesn't take out more than is necessary. But also, they're going to get a good feed out of this at the end of the day by capturing a lot of these kangaroos.
A human hand in the management of the landscape is clear from these early depictions. It's a land free of scrub, undergrowth and dead timber. The fuel of today's bushfires is missing. This was the land Captain Cook described when he first stepped ashore on the Australian continent.
From the moment of first engagement where Cook sets foot at Botany Bay in May 1770, he writes in his journal, "We made an excursion into the country, which we found
diversified with woodlawns and marshes. The woods are free of underwood of every kind, and the trees have such distance from one another that the whole country, or at least a great part of it, might be cultivated without being
obliged to cut down a single tree."
This lightly timbered country stretched along the east coast to Tasmania. But as traditional owners were forced off the land by Europeans, their careful management of country was abandoned, with devastating consequences. Black Thursday in February 1851. It's only 16 years after the founding of Melbourne, and already the land had changed enough to spark the first of the massive fires that consumed Victoria. This was possibly the greatest inferno ever recorded in Australia. It engulfed a quarter of the entire state. The descriptions of the survivors bear an eerie resemblance to more recent events for Victorians.
The fire kept enlarging its orbit, rolling about like some huge monster, destroying everything it touched. Its track marked by charred timber, embers and ashes, cries and lamentations. A total darkness which overspread the land and literally changed day into night, so intense as to hide from sight even the nearest objects.
Such events have become the predictable, recurring nightmare of Australian history. We've run out of days of the week to name them. A century and a half after Black Thursday came Black Saturday.
It was the hottest day ever I've seen up here, and the wind, you could hardly even stand up.
Jason and Ruth Lynn were at home on the outskirts of Melbourne in 2009 when the fires suddenly swept towards their house. Ruth grabbed the children and fled in their car.
All I could think about was getting out before the fire got here. When you've got two children, one still in nappies, I had to go. And then he said, "All right, if you're going to go, go now." When we got out on the road, the ground to the sky, as high as you can see, just flames. My whole world was on fire. The first thing I did was pull over and ring Jason to try and tell him what was coming. And he didn't answer his phone. I thought, well, I've just got to concentrate on keeping me alive and the kids, because I didn't think he had any chance. So I just kept going.
Jason committed to saving their home when the first of several fires crested the hill. Walls of flame coming from different directions.
When it came, I went all weak at the knees, you know, and I thought that was just the same, but I actually felt weak at the knees. It sounds like it's smashing through everything. All the trees are exploding and crashing, and then the actual, the flame itself, it's a roar sound. It's just like a real high roar. I was just thinking of my wife and kids. Just that's when the grief starts to come.
But for the people of King Lake, the worst was still to come.
When I first seen the black in the sky, I thought it was a cool change coming. I thought, oh good, you know, it just looked like a dark sky, like there's a bit of a storm or something brewing.
What Jason saw was the first signs of another lethal feature of Australian bushfires. The sudden shift in wind direction associated with a southwesterly change.
Very cold Antarctic air moving in from the south. For you and me, this is brilliant. It's a cool change. It's bringing relief. But for firefighters, it's a whole new set of challenges. A wind direction change is a change in the direction of bushfires. So a long flank of bushfires suddenly turns into a fire front.
This wind shift is common to most of Australia's worst fire disasters, and it had a deadly impact on Kinglake. The swift change grabbed the long tail of the fire and turned it into a vast fire front, heading straight for the town.
I could hear the windows breaking in the house, just the smash sound, and it was almost instantly followed by a howl sound, like a scream. The house was just like screaming with all the air just rushing in there. Yeah.
Surrounded by flames, Jason jumped into the dam. He was found later by rescuers, collapsed but alive, with his eyes burnt shut. 173 lives would be lost before the night was out. Most of the fatalities were trapped by a fire they'd been confident would pass them by, a deadly reminder of just how unpredictable our bushfires can be. But are these tragedies inevitable? Researchers are discovering ways of breaking the deadly cycle of Australia's infernos. As our cities continue to expand, more and more Australians are living on the edge of bushland and inside the fire zone. But you don't have to be beside the bush to be at risk. Australia's natural vegetation has evolved a deadly weapon that puts even suburban homes in harm's way. At the CSIRO's Pyrotron, they're studying how eucalyptus trees respond to flames and become potentially lethal.
What we've got is a typical eucalypt tree trunk that's covered with a fairly fibrous bark.
This bark is what makes Australian bushfires so dangerous, allowing them to spread at incredible speed.
Got a fire that will run up to a tree trunk and then have a fuel-free zone that might represent a road or a river or something. So if we run the fire and it burns up the trunk, we'll see if we can actually get some embers being transported across the break.
Inside the Pyrotron, we can reveal the eucalypt's unique adaptation to fire. Once alight, the bark breaks free, carrying the energy of the flames away, giving the tree a chance of surviving. Carried by the wind, these burning embers, called firebrands, become a flying incendiary and creating a spot fire ahead of the main blaze.
The transport of firebrands and embers is the primary cause for house loss in Australia, and it's the primary cause for the escape of fires from suppression. It's such an important aspect of the whole fire behaviour question that leads into understanding how houses are lost during bushfires. It leads into understanding how people get trapped by fire because they get surrounded by hundreds of spot fires. It's such a critical aspect to the whole bushfire question.
An ember attack from a distant fire can last for several hours. This security camera dramatically captured an ember shower attacking a house in the Blue Mountains last summer.
It was 100-mile-an-hour winds and it was 40 degrees. All the embers off all the gum trees, all the bark was just flying like bullets. We could hear ch-ch-ch-ch, and everything was just coming straight at you. It was just like you think, oh my God, are we going to survive this?
Embers don't just attack property. They also put firefighters in danger. In the right wind conditions, spot fires can break out 20 kilometres or more ahead of the main blaze.
That capacity in eucalypt forests to have that distance of spotting makes them very difficult to actually predict where they're going to go and makes them extremely difficult to try to put out.
In the Ash Wednesday fires in Victoria in 1983, spot fires led to tragedy.
The death of 13 volunteer firemen. All died when their 2 water trucks were circled by flames in St George's Road, Upper Beaconsfield.
Just a wall of fire, just engulfing everything in its path. And unfortunately, there were humans in this case.
75 lives were lost on Ash Wednesday, and the 13 volunteers who died in their trucks trying to save the lives of others struck an especially raw nerve. The Ash Wednesday 13 are just some of the estimated 80 deaths of fire and rescue workers caught in Australian bushfires, the bulk of them trapped in their vehicles.
Firefighters, they're trained to go back to their fire truck as their lifeboat. We needed to ensure that the lifeboat was viable just to help firefighters survive in those conditions.
Andrew Candell is part of a team of researchers working with the CSIRO to protect the lives of firefighters.
When a fire front goes through and passes over a truck, we need to know what are the weak points, what will catch fire, what will endanger the lives of the firefighters in the truck.
For decades, fire vehicles were little more than big trucks painted red. But experiments done here at the Rural Fire Service's Hot Training Centre are transforming the design of new vehicles. Years of research have progressively improved firefighting rigs to the point where they now give crews a good chance of surviving a burnover, the horrifying experience of flames passing over a vehicle.
This is one of our newer Cat 7s. It's got a series of improvements to the crew protection features of the fire truck. Probably the most significant is this ring around the top of the cabin, which has a number of sprinklers on it to create a wall of water around the outside of the cabin. The vehicle's also fitted with sprays in the wheel wells to put water over the wheels to keep the tyres from melting.
Inside the truck, protective curtains drop to allow some protection from the heat.
There's one across the front here and there's one on the sides, right? They just have Velcro to pull them down. So wherever there's glass and the ability for the radiant heat to come in from the fire, we have these things sitting in front of us now. Right guys, we've got an overrun! Secure!
Together with the sprinklers and curtains, all plastics have been removed from the exterior of these trucks.
We need to prepare ourselves, cover all of the exposed parts of our body.
Without these modifications, a burnover would transform the cabin into a smoking coffin.
It's the last place you want to be. You don't want to be in this situation. You do everything you can in terms of training and management to make sure you don't get here.
We don't get here.
And you know when you get here, it's not perfect, and you're likely to get burnt. This will reduce it a bit.
It will take years to upgrade the existing 8,000 vehicles to the latest standards. So in the meantime, we need to know more about what happens if the current models are caught in a blaze. So the CSIRO's Justin Leonard is conducting experiments on how to best retrofit the older vehicles.
We're looking at how the elements on the fire truck fail and in what sequence and which ones are the weakest elements. And we're also looking at how the survivability of the cabin progresses throughout the experiment.
Today, they're testing a commonly used model for both heat exposure and toxicity.
Is it going to be the toxic gases that might threaten the occupants of the cabin first? Is it the temperature? And also which parts of the cabin are more survivable than others? And what strategies they might need to undertake to improve their chances if they were caught in a burnover.
For Justin, there's only one way to fully experience the terror of facing an approaching wall of flame. From the inside. After just a few minutes exposure, and the flames still 6 meters away, the temperature has risen to an uncomfortable 50 degrees.
I definitely have to shield myself from the window to handle that. I can see smoke pouring rapidly off the outside.
As the temperature reaches 65 degrees, most crews would likely pass out. Outside the door, the temperature is 200 degrees, and the plastic handles and rubber fittings are melting.
It's pouring off the side door.
And inside, acrid smoke is beginning to enter the cabin. After just 3 minutes of exposure, Justin faces a lethal threat, and it's time to retreat. But the experiment continues. Carbon monoxide from the burning plastic is now filling the cabin, and the air is too hot and toxic to breathe. Firefighters inside would begin to suffocate. Now at 70 degrees, organs would begin to fail, and the flames still haven't even touched the truck.
At this point, there's obviously still way too much radiant heat anywhere around the vehicle. You couldn't possibly safely exit a truck even if you survived to this point.
After 5 minutes, the temperature inside is 190 degrees, enough to roast a chicken. Unsurvivable. These are the grim conditions that a fire crew would confront, trapped in a spot fire, started by a firebrand catapulted from a blaze kilometres away. Given the risks involved, it's essential to understand how different barks behave in the updrafts created by a bushfire.
We've got a vertical wind tunnel here that allows us to actually study the aerodynamics and combustion characteristics of pieces of bark as they're falling, because that's the critical factor that determines how far they'll actually travel.
Each species of eucalypt bark has its own spotting behaviour, and that means there are more than 700 varieties to test in the wind tunnel.
The vertical wind tunnel will actually enable us to tell what the maximum distance a firebrand will travel and successfully light a fire. And that's very important for firefighters to know what sort of distance they need to be considering where fires may break out when they least expect it from a fire that they're fighting.
Light barks travel further, but heavier ones will burn longer.
Fires can loft embers upwards of 10 kilometres vertically, and they can travel, a long way, up to 30 kilometres in some cases.
It's painstaking work, but these calculations are helping to build the warning systems that can be applied to fires anywhere in Australia.
The models that we develop are very easily slotted into development of computer simulation models for predicting the fire spread across the landscape.
The holy grail of bushfire science is a computer model that can predict how a fire will play out. And that bushfire in a box is already saving lives.
Record-breaking heat wave gripping Victoria.
It's high summer 2014, exactly 5 years on from the Black Saturday tragedy.
Temperatures to soar above 40 degrees for the third day in a row.
Victoria is in the middle of a heat wave, and the wind is picking up.
This is the most serious fire day we've had in the state in 5 years. The 9th of February 2014 was a day that we would see fires move in the landscape uncontrolled very quickly.
A big fire has broken out in Mickleham, not far from where the Black Saturday Inferno erupted. There's an uneasy feeling that a tragedy may be about to be repeated. But this time, there's a big difference.
Grab that. Emails just come back. I need to get an audience into this.
Unlike the fires of 2009, today the response is being guided by the world's most sophisticated predictive modelling program, Phoenix Rapid Fire. Phoenix is a $20 million project developed by a team at Melbourne University, led by fire ecologist Kevin Tolhurst.
A lot of people say fire's unpredictable, but that's because they really don't understand it. Fires aren't mystical. They follow the laws of science. It's just a matter of capturing the main factors that affect fire behaviour and putting them together.
Tolhurst has combined data from a vast range of sources, from Google Maps to meteorology to detailed topographic surveys of the entire country, and adds to it all we know about the variables of fire behaviour in different conditions.
It takes into account a whole range of input variables, so things like the terrain, the vegetation, the weather conditions, and shows how that plays out across the landscape.
By adding live weather data, Phoenix can predict how a fire will shift and expand, including the likelihood of spot fires jumping ahead of the fire front.
The burning firebrands usually stay alive up to about 25 minutes, so it's the distance away that a new fire will start will depend how far it can fly.
The aim is to ensure that Phoenix can give sufficient warning to people in danger, especially from spot fires.
You probably need at least 2 hours warning to be able to get out of the area, otherwise you're likely to be affected by this sea of embers landing in your area, trapping you in that area.
Phoenix can also replay previous disasters. When simulations were run on the Black Saturday fires, it revealed for the first time just why they were so deadly.
We did a simulation after the Black Saturday fires where we tried to understand why there were so many fatalities, and I think it was really instructive to actually look at that model process to realise that these people were actually having fires coming at them at all directions. It wasn't just the direction the wind was blowing the fire. And so you can see how they were trapped in sight and had no chance of escape.
So when Victoria was under threat again in 2014, Phoenix helped guide the emergency response.
We're just off Union Road, just south of Kilmore. The fire came through this area last night under the influence of very strong southerly winds. We did lose a number of houses, but to get through Sunday with what we believe is no loss of life, given the conditions we had, just an absolutely terrific effort.
The police came and advised us to leave, which I did, with dog, cat and chooks.
Phoenix advised where to deploy resources and which areas were under threat. And by responding rapidly with information rather than intuition, this time people were forewarned and able to get to safety.
I dipped my lid to those people and say thank you very much for their efforts. They're great work.
Technology is revolutionising emergency management.
Over the last 5 years, I think science and technology has changed dramatically, but certainly in the fire environment that there are new technologies, there are new approaches. If you get the right data and the information models, you'll make good decisions. And I think we've seen the outcome of that in Victoria this year means that people have not been in the way of fires, they've been able to move themselves away because they've had information early enough to make good decisions.
Still, despite the advances, we're barely keeping pace. Australia is locked in an escalating arms race with fire, and as the climate changes, the dangers are greater. We've been warned.
Summer over Australia in 2013-2014 was literally off the charts. We saw 156 records broken in just 90 days, and these included temperature records as well as rainfall records. So we saw increases in drought and some of the driest conditions we've experienced over some parts of the country. Melbourne had 4 days in a row above 41 degrees Celsius, so that's really hot. Adelaide had 5 days in a row above 42 degrees Celsius, and they actually had 11 days overall that were above 42 degrees Celsius. Perth had its hottest night ever on record, which was above 29 degrees Celsius. And Canberra had 20 days above 35 degrees Celsius. So wherever you look in Australia, there was all these records being broken. We absolutely blitzed them. We're off the charts once again.
Since records began, major fire events have almost always occurred in summer. But in 2013, the Blue Mountains fire season began in September, with huge fires in October. An unprecedented event, meaning half the year was spent on high alert.
You can be in climate change denial if you like, but the evidence is there that the climate is changing and producing more unusual weather events.
Phil Koperberg is Australia's most experienced firefighter. He fought his first blaze as a teenager. For more than 20 years, he ran the Rural Fire Service, and he's lived in the fire-prone Blue Mountains for 4 decades.
This is a typical sort of mountains environment, a normal street, lots of vegetation, lots of interface, and very fire-prone.
His backyard is typical of the threat Australia faces from a combination of climate change and the growing number of homes being built inside the fire zone. So he wasn't at all surprised that the portents of disaster came incredibly early in 2013. At the New South Wales Rural Fire Service headquarters, they did their best to prepare for an unprecedented event.
So the weather conditions, as you know, we had severe fire danger up there today.
We were seeing winds in excess of 100 kilometres an hour. The conditions were saying when, not if. It was as simple as that.
But when the inevitable happened, no one expected a blaze of such intensity and speed.
These conditions are a whole new ballgame and in a league of their own.
Just north of the Blue Mountains, a red-hot firestorm is brewing. The national park is ablaze.
On our right here, you have the westernmost point of the fire. It started in there somewhere. Once ignition had taken place, the fire moved very quickly, being driven by gale force northwesterly winds. At this point in time, there were probably 300 to 500 houses that were potentially exposed, including these properties we're driving through now.
All of a sudden, the AAA calls started coming in, and we just got flooded with calls for assistance.
Springwood and Winmalee turned to hell on earth.
The most intense fire I've seen for a long time.
It's time to go. It's time to leave.
Yeah.
Get out, man. It's the smoke that'll get you.
The Blue Mountains fires moved with incredible speed. Spot fires ahead of the front soon threatened 5 different townships. On the ground, it was desperate hand-to-hand fighting through the suburbs to try and save people and property. This helmet camera footage from Captain Jonathan Mallon gives some idea of the task that firefighters face in areas where houses crowd into the bush, an increasingly common setting across Australia.
Are you staying inside? I'll bang on the door if I've got to get you out. Yeah, okay.
Fighting a bushfire is hard enough, but urban combat in the residential streets is something different altogether. Now they're dealing with frightened and confused civilians in the middle of it all.
It's too late. You cannot go. Stay in your house. In the house. Close the door.
Fighting fires in any scenario is dangerous enough. Fighting a bushfire, which is burning under the influence of 80 to 100 km/h winds and temperatures of 40 plus degrees, is extraordinarily dangerous. You add into that mix burning houses, emitting bits of building material and roofing being blown around by these very strong winds, and it's a war zone.
More than 200 homes were lost in these fires, the worst damage ever recorded in the mountains. all destroyed in just 2.5 hours of a furious, unstoppable inferno. And it wasn't even summer. The loss of property on this scale devastates a community, and that legacy can last a lifetime.
I know it's a different cost to loss of life, but of course it is. But there is an enormous cost to people. There was one, and I used to end the day more often than not in tears.
Today, Phil Koperberg's job is to help the Blue Mountains pick up the pieces as bushfire recovery coordinator.
The shock of losing literally everything you've ever owned, everything you've ever accumulated, and to some extent one's identity. You come back to a block containing nothing but burnt remnants of a house, and literally you're on your own. And that has an enormous psychological